U.S. Senator John Cornyn, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. So, wanted to get started by asking you about your confidence level of the Congress averting a shutdown later this week. As you know, the government runs out of money 12:01 a.m. Saturday.
Well, Winston Churchill once famously said that the Americans always do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility. And Congress has exhausted every other possibility other than actually dealing with the problem. And so I think a shutdown is highly unlikely. No one benefits from that. We don't save any money. We actually spend more money. And the same problems that cause you to shut down are there staring you in the face when you reopen. So I'm pretty optimistic about that. How we get there may get kind of tricky, but I think we will get there.
Wanted to ask you about the new Speaker of the House has come up with a two-step plan that doesn't include cuts. It keeps the government funded partially through January 19th, and then the military and other programs through February 2nd. What's your thought on that?
Well, I know the new speaker is trying to get his sea legs. This is a different job that he's ever held before. It's a unique job and one that's been particularly dangerous in terms of one's longevity in office. But I think what he is trying to do is get us back to some sort of regular appropriations process. And the House needs more time in order to pass bills out of the House and then to conference those with the Senate. There's still going to be some big fights about the spending levels, as there should be. Our debt is now 100% of our economy, GDP, and we are paying hundreds of billions of dollars to our bondholders to finance that debt. So I'm glad to see, for example, in the supplemental appropriation for Israel funding, that the House came up with some offsets, so that would not add to the debt. I hope this is a beginning of a new trend where we actually pay attention to fiscal responsibility. So I wish him well. But
isn't that funding deal that the House passed, isn't that dead on arrival in the Senate and the White House? The president has already said he's going to veto that.
Yeah, that's what they said. My suggestion is if they don't like the pay-fors, which is taking $14 billion of the IRS funding in the Inflation Reduction Act, which was $80 billion of additional spending, 14 of the 80 billion. If they don't like that, then come up with another one. The truth is, I don't think the president or the current leadership, Senator Schumer and others, actually believe in paying for things. But if we aren't careful and we don't change our ways, we won't be able to pay for much of anything other than to pay the Chinese and Japanese for interest on our debt. So this is a serious matter and one that I'm glad they're taking seriously.
So do you see, as far as the president's call for a plan on funding for Israel and Ukraine and the border, do you see any semblance of that passing?
Yes, I do. What I'm amazed about is that the Senate has not acted at all on the Israel funding. There seems to be broad consensus that we need to support our ally in Israel. I certainly support that funding. But the Senate has done nothing. On Ukraine, the speaker has made clear that he wants to tie that to policy changes on the border, which I certainly support. We have seen the Biden administration turn a blind eye to the crisis on the border for years now. And we in Texas are bearing the brunt of that, but it's also extending to other parts of the country like New York and Washington, D.C. and Chicago and the like. And so even Democrat-oriented mayors are speaking up and saying, you got to do something about it. Well, we've got a proposal to do something about it, to reform the asylum system, to disallow people to claim asylum in the United States if they transit a safe third country, for example, because this is not the sort of illegal immigration we've seen historically, which is poor people coming here to work so they can send money home. This is literally being exploited by people who are willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars to travel from around the world and to end up at our border and then to claim asylum only to be released into the interior of the United States. So they keep coming. And of course, the ones that benefit most from this are the human smugglers and the drug cartels who are continuing to get rich based on the status quo. That's got to change.
So you talked about a lot there. Let me just ask you, I want to get to the Israel-Hamas war and then border security, but just going back to the spending agreement that has to happen by the end of the week, what implications do you think there are for the 2024 presidential election?
Well, I think because we're so balled up when it comes to the regular appropriations process, it's the status quo is not working. We have to change that when we get back in the majority. But I'm very bullish on our chances to win the majority in the Senate. We've got a number of states that have incumbent senators who were the last Democratic office holders in those states. And we saw Joe Manchin, for example, just decided not to run for reelection. So that's a pickup for us. The presidential elections seems to be more confusing, although I saw my friend Tim Scott has now suspended his campaign. And I think hopefully we'll see some consolidation there. But clearly the American people think the direction our country is going in is a bad one. And the only way to change that, I believe, is to change who is president and who is the leader of the free world. So I think I am putting a lot of hope in the outcome of this upcoming election, because I don't think you're going to change President Biden. He's pretty much been consistent in his positions for the time he's been in office. Even Democrats say they don't want him to run for reelection, but it's going to be a very historic election, because never before have I seen the risks to our country and to world peace so grave. And we need strong leadership. And unfortunately, President Biden does not convey that strength that is so necessary on the world stage.
Wanted to go back to the Israel-Hamas war. There have been an increasing number of people calling for a ceasefire by Israel. What's your thought on that?
I do not support a ceasefire. That's like somebody punching you in the face, Jack, and then when you try to defend yourself, said, "Now you can't do that." Literally, Hamas is a Iranian proxy. Iran, of course, is the #1 state sponsor of international terrorism. Hamas is a United States government designated terrorist organization. And what they did on October the 7th was beyond barbaric. And I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the leadership in Israel needs to eliminate that threat. They've tried to coexist with Hamas in Gaza and trying to make that work. Obviously, that does not work. And Iran saw an opportunity to encourage its proxy, Hamas, to kill innocent civilians and to abduct hostages, men, women, and children. We've all seen those horrific pictures. So I believe we need to give Israel the space and the time they need to eliminate that threat.
And what do you make of the rising anti-Semitism on college campuses and just on some of the streets across the country?
Well, it's very troubling, because I think really what it does is it calls into question our basic values as human beings. People choosing sides on choosing the side of a terrorist organization against innocent civilians, women and children being abducted, killed, beheaded. I don't understand that. Unfortunately, I think this may speak to some of the conditions at our college campuses where some people are encouraged to believe in these causes and disregard the consequences. I'm all for free speech. I'm all for people being able to express themselves, but how anyone could condone what has happened to Israel on October the 7th is beyond me.
And going back to border security, you mentioned there's a bipartisan group of senators right now working on changing the asylum, and you spoke to that a little bit earlier. What's your sense on whether this is going to pass? Because you have some members of the House who said, you know, they need to basically shut down the border. They take a very different stance on this. And so I'm wondering, how is this all going to shake out? Because there hasn't been any agreement on how to deal with immigration and what's going on at the southern border for decades.
Yeah, Jack, this is a very different negotiation from what we've had in the past. The fact of the matter is the administration wants funding for Ukraine. I happen to support continued funding for Ukraine because I worry that Mr. Putin will not stop in Ukraine, and then he'll engage one of the NATO countries with which we are allied and invoke a provision of that treaty, which will require us to get directly involved in that conflict. So, but this is something that is going to be the price for getting that done. It also will grow the support for the Ukraine funding because there are a number of people who said this is their number one priority, dealing with the border. And this isn't just money that will help facilitate the current policies. We need to change some of those policies. For example, the catch and release policies of the Biden administration, which has just encouraged more and more people to come to the United States. There's a reason why we are seeing historic numbers of people at our border. It's because there is no deterrence. There are no consequences associated with illegally coming to the United States and entering the country. And in effect, President Biden has outsourced our immigration system to drug cartels and criminal organizations, and it has to stop.
And I wanted to also ask you about, Texas right now has a lawsuit against the Biden administration. There are a variety of them, but specifically with regards to the feds tearing apart some of the razor wire, the barbed wire that the state has put up along the border. What's your thought on that?
Well, the state of Texas has a right to defend itself and its sovereignty, and that's what Governor Abbott and the Texas leaders are doing in the absence of any real support from the federal government. And we bear a disproportionate burden of the consequences of failing to secure the border and failing to eliminate illegal immigration and drug smuggling into the United States. So I certainly believe Texas has every right to do this. And unfortunately, it's because President Biden is not doing his job.
U.S. Senator John Cornyn, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack.